Hello and welcome back to our latest We Are Sunderland briefing with myself, Dom Shaw. I'm delighted to be joined by James Hunter today in the absence of Scott Wilson, who'll making money, no doubt, at Cheltenham for the week. So he's back at the back end of the week. So James has stepped in to help us out. And James was at the Stadium of Light on Tuesday night for the 1-1 draw with Preston, which we'll obviously get stuck into. Just a thanks, as ever, before we start, to our partners, We Are Sunderland, the Fans Museum and Cospex Opticians. Thanks to you for watching. Thanks for subscribing. If you haven't, then just tap the button below the screen. And if you're listening on your podcast platforms, then rate and review there as well. Before we get into the game last night, James, where does that draw leave us? I mean, the kind of top two felt like unlikely anyway. It was Burnley and Sheffield United didn't win last night, which added to the frustrations on Tuesday night. Which added to the frustrations. But is that the night where you kind of accept defeat? That's probably gone.
I think, in reality, I think those back-to-back defeats against Leeds and Hull was probably the moment where you thought that realistically there isn't a chance of catching the top two. There's always an outside chance, of course. If a two of the top three absolutely, their form absolutely falls off a cliff. But there was always a feeling that it was probably going to be beyond Sunderland. And I think that when you drop points as Sunderland did against Preston, on a night when Sheffield United and Burnley both drop points as well, if you don't capitalise when those teams drop points, then that just reinforces the view. I think we can all see now that Sunderland look like they're going to be, in the playoffs, and these top two positions are going to be beyond them. I mean, of course, you've got to keep going till the end, and there's always the chance that some, two of the top three slip up. But it's a faint chance, and it's dwindling all the time as the games run out.
And I guess a more pressing priority for Regis Lebris on the back of Tuesday night's game was the performance, rather than worrying about the table and what happened elsewhere and what the points gap is or has been or is going to be. Some of them were flat, weren't they? Was it a worrying performance, or is that overdoing it? What was your feeling afterwards?
I wouldn't say it's worrying. I mean, it's a bit of a continuation of a theme. I think that at home, while Sunderland's record has been excellent, all season, only that one defeat against Hull. More recently, since the end of January, performances have not been as good. Whether that's because other teams are throwing a bit of a blanket over Sunderland and trying to nullify them and are being a bit more negative. Or whether it's because Sunderland have begun to tire a little bit. Some of the key players have not been as influential in recent games as they were earlier in the season. Perhaps they're tiring, a bit of fatigue creeping in. But I don't think it's a panic station because Sunderland are in such a good position, with a 15-point gap between Sunderland and seventh place. I don't think there's any real concern that they'll miss out on the playoffs. That would be an absolute catastrophe in terms of form for them to do that. And if that happened, then they wouldn't deserve to be in the playoffs. So I don't think that's a real worry. I think the biggest concern for Sunderland is approaching the end of the season. You can't afford to coast to the end of the season and then just expect to turn it back on when the playoffs come round. They need to go into the playoffs on a decent run of form. Form isn't something that you can just switch on and off. So they can't afford to just relax and sort of freewheel to the line. They do have to keep pushing, but there's always a balance there, isn't there? In that you don't want to be risking serious injuries to key players either. That would be a big problem. So that's a balance that Regis Lebris is going to have to come to terms with.
And that's felt like the challenge, hasn't it? Probably since the Leeds defeat, when after that you're kind of thinking, well, hold on, right? Maybe the top two now feels like a stretch. The challenge has been maintaining that momentum, or maintaining some momentum between now and the end of the season, because for all you can't switch off and then suddenly turn it back on a game when it matters, that the players know in the back of their minds, even if there's no kind of conscious change in effort or desire or any of that, the pressure is off ever so slightly.
Yeah.
These games are not must win.
Yeah.
Clearly, Sunderland are going to benefit from winning games, but you know what I mean.
Yeah. How do you motivate your players at a time when the shape of what remains of your season is already really set? As I say, barring an absolute miracle and you make the top two, or an absolute catastrophe and you miss out on the top six, how do you maintain that that momentum, that desire to win every game? It's not easy. I think you've seen in recent games, you've seen Regis Labrie rotate his squad a little bit, give players a bit of a chance, give other players a bit of a rest. Wilson Isidor, of course, who's been in such great form. The last thing you want to do is risk playing him 3 games in a week, in back-to-back weeks, and then him ending up injured in a manner that might risk him for the playoffs. So it is a balance. How do you keep it all ticking along? And that, I guess, is what the head coach is paid to do. And we look at it from the outside. They have the statistics and the data on how the players are performing, and they know who is dipping. We've seen recently, say Chris Rigg, for instance, who's still a young teenager in his first real breakthrough season. He's probably not been as effective in the last couple of months as he certainly was in the first half of the season. That's only natural. He's played an awful lot of games in a short space of time, and he's still a young lad. So how do you reduce some of the burden on him and let him take him out for a game or two, which they've done, and then bring him in? He did look very bright when he did come on, against Preston the other night.
You wonder whether he'll do the same with Joe Bellingham at some point, because Job is another player who I think looks like he'd maybe benefit from a couple of games, just getting refreshed and recovered. I thought he might do it last night, obviously with last night or Tuesday night being the cut-off for the 10 yellow cards. But thankfully, Bellingham came through that all right. Will Tuesday night be the last time we see Labrie tinker with the 4-4-2, do you think? Because didn't really work, did it? Sunderland improved after he took a striker off and went back to his preferred shape.
Yeah, it didn't work. I mean, it has worked, and previously when he's used 4-4-2, I think back in January, I can't remember the opposition as we're talking now, but he did play that. Was it Stoke? I can't remember. Whoever it was, anyway, he changed the system, and it worked really well. But it didn't work against Preston, and they were much better when he switched back to his preferred system. And I think he'll still use 4-4-2 or odd times, but it might be the last time that you see him start that way. I think you might see him move to that system in a game if they're chasing a game and if it suits it. But my gut feeling is that for the remainder of the season, he'll at least start with his preferred formation.
And with that in mind, then, who should start up front? Because Mayenda, I thought, was better than Isidor last night. Isidor missed the sitter in the first half, obviously. It didn't quite fall for him. It didn't quite happen for him in the box. He'd obviously had a couple of games out. Labrie was asked about that change afterwards and why he opted to take Mayenda off rather than Isidor. And he said that fatigue was in his mind. Mayenda's played a fair bit of football recently, obviously, compared to Isidor. And said ultimately the change worked because Sunderland got the equaliser. But what do you think of Coventry on Saturday? You suspect he'll go back to his favoured shape and play with one orthodox striker.
Yeah.
Will it be Isidor?
My guess is yes. I think that of the two of them, Isidor is still the more dangerous. Still, if you've got Isidor and Mayenda running through on goal in a 1-on-1, or you get one chance, Isidor is the one that you'd put your money on scoring, isn't it? Mayenda is, while he's been excellent of late, he can be hit and miss at times, whereas Isidor's more reliable. I think in an away game as well against a team like Coventry, Isidor holds the ball up better, and I think that'll make a big difference in the shape that he likes to play. The 4-2-3-1.
And that Coventry game is a tough game, isn't it, for Sunderland? We'll just run the fixtures across the bottom of the screen there. Coventry, obviously the final game before the international break, and then it comes back with Millwall, West Brom, Norwich and Swansea. Quite a testing spell, really. West Brom away, Tony Mowbray's gone in and got a good reaction out of the baggies there, which is good to see. If the season ended tomorrow, it'd be Sunderland versus Tony Mowbray in the playoffs, which I was in the press room at the Stadium Light on Tuesday night, and Trey Hume was being asked about that and was talking about how fondly Mowbray is thought of in the Sunderland dressing room. Good to see him doing well at West Brom. Obviously, I think everyone at Sunderland would share those thoughts. But yeah, Coventry next. They lost last night at Derby, which is probably a result not many saw coming. But Lampard has had a real impact there. An appointment that was probably seen as a bit of a head scratcher when it was made on the back of his disappointing recent spells. But fair play, he's done a good job there, and that would probably, for all we said there about West Brom, I think you'd probably put Coventry as favourites to finish fifth as things stand. They look the best of those chasing teams. Me and Scott spoke about this last week. It's still too early to be talked about as a dress rehearsal or anything like that. But it'll be interesting, won't it, to see how Sunderland measure up against them at the weekend.
Yeah, I mean, they are a strong side, and Sunderland have struggled against them in the past, in previous seasons. So, there's absolutely no question that they'll be an easy team to play against. Absolutely not. But it will be interesting to see how they measure up against a team who could be one of the who are one of the direct contenders for one of those playoff spots. Obviously, Coventry being one, West Brom in a couple of weeks' time being another. There are going to be some games against teams that are in that mix, in that fight, and it's going to be really quite fascinating to see how they measure up. A lot is going to depend on the form going into the playoffs, as we were saying a few minutes ago. There's time for things to shift. There's the 9 games still to go, so there's still time for things to shift on that. I mean, obviously Coventry are doing pretty well at the moment, but there's no guarantees that they will be come the end of the season.
It's going to be interesting now when you talk about the remaining 9 games to see how Lebris plays it with Mundle and Watson, both fully fit now. Mundle started on Saturday, Watson started on Tuesday. Mundle comes on and makes an impact from the bench. We talked about this last week, but I'd asked Lebris last week or the week before about that and how he plans to use them both. Now they're fully up to speed, or getting fully up to speed, getting fully fit. And he talked about having kind of one as a starter, really, and one as a finisher. And we saw that, I think, on Tuesday night, didn't we? Mundle coming off the bench, making an impact. What a weapon to have, either of those on the bench to come on in games, especially when you get in the playoffs. Now, touch wood, they stay fit between now and the end of the season. They're going to be fully up to speed by then, fully fit. And that's some option for Lebris to have, isn't it? Whoever it is who starts on the bench.
It is, yeah. I mean, Romaine Mundle's made a real difference, I feel, in the last couple of games. He has really, brought something to the side. I think that Tommy Watson disappointed me a little bit against Preston. I think he's very, obviously making the allowance that he's still a young player, just breaking into the team. He just hit good form when he got injured. And he's only just coming back from that now. I think he's back in a situation where he was a few months ago, where it took him a few games to adapt to life in the Championship, and then, as I say, he had hit good form and then got the injury. I think he's again in that situation where he's going to need a couple of games and then he'll hit form again. But Mundle has made the difference. I mean, not just obviously the spectacular goal that he scored against Preston, but even at the weekend, I thought he was excellent as well. I think at times he reminds me of Jack Clark when he's out there. He chops inside, and he runs. He's very direct. He puts fullbacks on the spot. So for me, I would be looking to start with Romaine Mundle wherever possible and use Tommy Watson as the finisher, if that's how Labrie is going to do it. Of course, with the proviso that you don't want to overuse Romaine Mundle. He's had an injury himself. You can't expect him to start every single game if it's going to be Saturday, Tuesday, Saturday, Tuesday, Saturday, Tuesday. You don't want to risk him picking up another injury and finding him out of contention for the playoffs again.
And what about Rigg? I mean, do you expect Rigg to come back into the team and nail down a spot again before the playoffs start? Is this just an extended period of rest, basically, having played so much football, do you think? Or when you look at the team and you consider that Enzo Lefebvre to come back as well, and Dan Neil and Joe Bellingham are unlikely to lose their place. Patrick Roberts is a pretty nailed-on starter on the right. Or is it going to be difficult for Rigg to get back in, do you think?
I do think that he'll come back into the team and nail down that spot. He, as I was saying, I think I wrote a column a few months ago saying that Job and Dan Neil and Chris Rigg are the best midfield in the Championship when they're all firing. As I say, I think Chris Rigg's has the games have caught up with him a little bit recently, and he's understandably fell victim to a bit of fatigue, which is why he's been taken out of the firing line. But I do think he'll come back and be stronger than ever.
This position Sunderland find themselves in then, with kind of, I don't want to say little to play for, because clearly Sunderland are in a brilliant position. This time last year, they probably had little to play for when the season was peaking out, couldn't end soon enough. They weren't going to go down, they weren't going to go up. But obviously you covered Sunderland for many years. Can you remember a season like this, a position like this at this stage of a season?
No, it's that there will have been seasons like this. I mean, I don't think there have been a season quite like this where Sunderland have been coasting. I mean, they've always been competing for something, whether it's against relegation or for a playoff place, or for the title when under Roy Keane and Mick McCarthy and such have you, that in the second tier there's always been something. They've never had anything easy, if you like. They've never been able to kick back and coast to the finishing line. And don't get me wrong, Sunderland shouldn't be doing that now either, but there does feel like the pressure is off them somewhat. And that's an interesting situation to be in. It's an unfamiliar one for Sunderland. It'll be fascinating to see how they handle that. Of course, there's no direct comparisons because players and head coaches and managers and everything changes all the time. You can't say, well, this group of players has never had that before. It's just an unfamiliar feeling, I think, for Sunderland fans to see their team with so much breathing space. And I think everybody, that's why we're talking about it now. We don't know how the club handles that, or how the group of players and what the atmosphere is. It's such an unfamiliar scenario. If we'd seen it before, then we'd have a better handle on it, I think.
I think a sense of perspective undoubtedly helps as well, doesn't it? The fact that Sunderland was so poor in the second half of last season, and an automatic promotion push felt extremely unlikely, even, I guess, for the most optimistic of supporters at the start of the season. You looked at the squad of players and thought, well, yeah, they should be, that squad is talented enough to get themselves in the mix for the playoffs. But you can only go on the evidence in front of you. And the second half of last season was so far off, wasn't it? There's no indication really that Sunderland were going to start the season as they had done. I think especially as well, without going over all ground, the fact Labrie was very much an unknown quantity as well.
Yeah, I think that's it, and I think this is something that Sunderland fans are becoming more and more conditioned to, because of the way that the club is run now and the strategy of the club. Coming from Christian Speakman and from the board itself, there are so many leaps in the dark that fans are being asked to take, whether it's over Regis Labrie, who I should imagine not even the most keen followers of French football amongst Sunderland fans knew very much about. And then you look at the players that are coming in. I wouldn't have thought that many Sunderland fans knew much about Wilson Isidor or Enzo Lefebvre or whoever else. When players arrive now, we genuinely don't know what to expect from them. And thankfully, touch wood, for the majority of the time, we've been pleasantly surprised. There's not a 100% hit rate. Of course, there are players that have come in and it hasn't worked for them, and they've either been moved on or they're kicking their heels, in the reserves, or some of them not even in the reserves and waiting to be shipped out. But for the vast majority of the seasons, it's worked out well, and that's why Sunderland are where they are. But I don't think anybody would have predicted at the start of the season that we will be 10 games, nearly 10 games from the end of the season, 9 games from the end of the season, and we're still talking about, top 2 looks out of reach. There's always a chance. You know what I mean? I think everybody would have settled for a conversation where the top 2 even figured at all.
And on the subject of predictions, the weekend, what do you reckon? Coventry on Saturday.
Coventry Saturday, I think I'm going to say 1-1 draw. I'd love to see Sunderland win down there. Of course I would. But coming up from a tough away game like that against a playoff contender with a point would certainly be no disaster. And
I think this international break almost gives chance, just a chance for a breather, doesn't it? Before this final push, right? The build to the playoffs starts now. The build to those kind of final game shootout starts now. Let's build some momentum. Let's go into the playoffs on a high, especially with a home game coming after the international break. You've got a few players like Lefebvre coming back from injury. It feels like quite an important stoppage at a good time for Sunderland.
It does, yeah. It does. It gives a bit of a chance to take stock and to get some players back fit again. I think it's going to be a bit of a mindset shift for Sunderland fans. I think that there has to be a bit of pragmatism creep in there, and have to realise that it's not about going flat out to the line, and the start of the playoffs. It's more a case of getting this squad and this group of players in the best possible shape for the playoffs. Of course, you can't just say, results don't matter. Of course they matter. Let's not make any bones about that. But you can use these games, the remainder of the games, to work players like Enzo Lefebvre when he's ready, to get them back up to full speed, so that with in mind those playoff games come the end of the season. That has got to be in the thinking. But of course, you can't take your eye off the ball and then suddenly find yourself scrambling around for 6th place in the last 2 or 3 games of the season. That would be unforgivable. But assuming that doesn't happen, then you got to set your sights on getting the squad into the best possible condition for those playoff games.
Brilliant. And Sunderland have set the sights on Coventry at the weekend, so we'll have analysis and reaction from there at the weekend on We Are Sunderland, so do keep your eyes on the site. Obviously, as I said at the start, thank you if you subscribe to the channel. If you don't, then just tap the button below. And thanks again to our partners, Cospecs, Opticians and the Fans Museum. Thanks, James. Thanks for watching. Thanks for listening. Enjoy the rest of your week, and we'll be back next week for our next We Are Sunderland briefing. Take care.